In Peru, demonstrations continue against Dina Boluarte's government. The new leadership of the Defense Front of the People of Ayacucho pledged to continue the struggle to promote political change in the country. In Brazil, the federal police arrested former Justice Minister Anderson Torres in the framework of investigations into coup actions against President Lula da Silva on January 8th. And the governments of Syria and Russia evaluate mechanisms for deepening cooperation in the energy sector. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. The people of Peru remain out on the streets in rejection of President Dina Boluarte's government and to demand a number of political changes in the country. On Friday night, residents of Ayacucho marched in the streets to demand the release of leaders and students arrested by the national police, claiming that this is a typical measure of a dictatorship that seeks to intimidate the population by means of death and arbitrary arrests. Demonstrators walked through the main streets of Huamanga before they elected a new board of directors of the People's Defense Front of Ayacucho, which will work provisionally with the following platform: freedom for the prisoners, resignation of President Dina Boluarte, closing of Congress, and new elections.
The government very calmly goes around through local media saying that the solution here is to open fire, that the solution here is to repress, understanding this as a fight against terrorism. When the people are not terrorists, the people are fighting because this government does not represent them, because Mrs. Dina Boluarte has behaved in a treacherous manner, because she said she would resign if Pedro Castillo was removed. And besides this, after assuming the presidency, as she says, because the Constitution says so in terms of the succession of presidents, what is she doing? She's not doing anything that matches the government of Pedro Castillo. She should continue with his work, shouldn't she? What she has done is to sell her soul to the devil, and she has opened the doors for the far right to enter the government palace.
In Peru, congressmen filed a complaint against the 19 ministers that make up the cabinet of President Dina Boluarte, who on Friday reiterated that she will remain in office despite demonstrations demanding her resignation. Congresswoman Kelly Portalatino from the Peru Libre Party presented the initiative before the Subcommission of Constitutional Accusations. She indicated the accusation responds to the crimes perpetrated by the administration against the Peruvian citizens, including homicides and serious injuries. During the demonstrations that have taken place in the past weeks, the violent repression against the protests demanding Boluarte's resignation have left a total of nearly 50 civilians killed, as well as hundreds of demonstrators injured or detained. In the official document, Portalatino requested that the responsibilities of the accused officials be determined through a special parliamentary process. The Peruvian Ministry of Transport and Communications said Saturday that Cusco's International Airport resumed operations after 2 days of suspension due to social protests. The government entity announced on its Twitter account that it has coordinated with law enforcement agencies to ensure the safety of passengers and members of the aviation community, as well as to safeguard airport operations. The Cusco Airport suspended its operations on January 12th as a security measure in view of the protests taking place in that city. The previous day, the situation had escalated in the city and groups of demonstrators had tried to take over the airport, where there was a strong presence of the national police. Clashes produced at the time left 1 civilian dead and 10 injured. In Brazil, the former Minister of Justice and Public Security in the government of Jair Bolsonaro, Anderson Torres, was arrested on Saturday in the framework of the investigation for the coup acts against Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva. According to local media, the arrest took place at the International Airport of Brasilia around 7:20 a.m. local time, when he arrived in the capital on a flight from the United States. Afterwards, he was transferred to the Superintendence of the Police of the Federal District. His arrest was ordered by the Supreme Court Judge Alexander de Moraes, who is investigating him for alleged omission and complicity during the assault on the headquarters of the executive, legislative, and judicial powers. Torres was the Secretary of Security of the federal district government and therefore the most responsible for guaranteeing the integrity of the public buildings that were invaded by Bolsonaro's supporters. In Uruguay, authorities confirmed that the expiration date of COVID-19 vaccines will be extended. The National Ministry of Public Health made this statement after civilians had noticed that many of the vaccines being administered had an expiration date of September 2022. According to the public entity, the extension of the deadline for the use of vaccines and medicines is always carried out through a standardized process with maximum guarantees. The ministry mentioned that Pfizer Laboratories had first obtained a validation on its vaccine for 6 months, before receiving a second endorsement for 1 year. Therefore, in December, the vaccine shelf life was extended for 18 months. Gabriel Pelufo, Immunization Director of the Public Ministry, confirmed to local media that a rigorous investigation is being made on the biological stability of the vaccines and emphasized that citizens who are being vaccinated can rest assured that the vaccine has a technical endorsement. Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok at the account at teleSUR English, in which you'll be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and much more. All the stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back from the South. In Venezuela, a large march of homeland educators demonstrated its support to the educational policies implemented by the national government, together with the rejection of the Western sanctions imposed on the country. During the mobilization, educators from all around the country raised their voices to defend the achievements of the Bolivarian Revolution, in spite of the blockades and illegal sanctions imposed on the country by the government of the United States. Likewise, teachers and other demonstrators call on the people not to fall into Western provocations that seek to destabilize peace in the national territory. During the demonstration, Orlando Perez, president of the National Union Teachers Unitary Force, stated that President Nicolas Maduro and the Minister of Education, Yelitze Santaella, urged educators not to leave their classrooms without defense. In her speech, in the context of the Great March of the Homeland Educators, Venezuela's Executive Vice President Delcy Rodriguez said that despite the economic blockade imposed by the United States, the country achieved economic growth in all sectors in the year 2022.
We are here today, in January 2023, closing a victorious 2022 with a growth, comrades, a growth that we cannot deny, an economic growth in all sectors. But the enemy still exists, and during the last quarter of 2022, it wanted to disturb the economic peace, the social peace of our country. We lost and they brought the stability, and our workers are suffering from it.
In Venezuela, the governor of the state and the Archdiocese of Barquisimeto announced activities for the celebration of the Divina Pastora 2023. The sacred image of the Divina Pastora will once again walk the streets of Barquisimeto, capital of Lara State, on her 165th visit after a 2-year pause due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The motto this year is Mary's Sign of Reunion. The Central Organizing Committee announced, in addition to the traditional procession, other events beginning in December with a greater number of visitors expected. The government of Colombia and the National Liberation Army will meet in Venezuela next week to resume peace talks. According to Oti Patiño, head of the Colombian government's negotiating team, the dialogues will be resumed next Tuesday in Venezuela. At a meeting, the parties will discuss the ceasefire promoted by President Gustavo Petro and evaluated by the insurgent group. The meeting will be held under an extraordinary character since the second round of talks with the ELN will start in Mexico in mid-February. In recent days, the ELN reiterated that it would respect the dialogue agenda with the Colombian government. Retired Army General Peter Pavel narrowly defeated populist Andres Babis on Saturday in the first round of the Czech presidential election. The result sets up a runoff vote between the political newcomer and the former prime minister. Pavel and Babis advanced to the second round of voting because none of the 8 candidates seeking the country's largely ceremonial role as president received a majority of votes in the initial round held on Friday and Saturday. With the ballots from 99.9% of the polling stations counted by the Czech Statistics Office, Pavel had 35.39% of the vote compared with 35% for Babis. Other candidates, Danush Nerudova and Pavel Fischer, pledged support for Pavel in the runoff in 2 weeks. Voter turnout was 68.2%. The governments of Germany and Iraq strengthened energy ties and bilateral cooperation during the visit of Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammad Shia al-Sudani to the European country. In a joint press conference during a meeting in Berlin, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Iraqi Prime Minister al-Sudani reviewed investment opportunities in the gas and petrochemical sectors, as well as strategic relations between the two nations. The Iraqi minister highlighted German military advice to confront the Daesh terrorist group in the country, as well as their support in the recovery of smuggled antiquities. The German Chancellor said that his government is looking for individual suppliers after the problems derived from the conflict in Ukraine and the European sanctions against Russia, and assured that the Arab nation is a very important cooperation partner. Russian armed forces continue their offensive in the adhered territories, inflicting casualties on Ukrainian regime forces in the regions of Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kharkov, and Lugansk. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov confirmed that aviation artillery forces attacked Ukrainian positions, causing more than 30 casualties, as well as the loss of 2 tanks, 2 armored combat vehicles, and 3 other vehicles in Lugansk. The spokesman also confirmed the dismantling of 2 sabotage groups in the Kharkov region, as well as several ammunition depots in Donetsk and Zaporizhia. Konashenkov also pointed out that the anti-aircraft defense system shot down 4 Ukrainian drones and intercepted 7 shells from multiple missile launchers. Vasily Nebensia, Russia's permanent representative to the United Nations, declared on Friday that Ukraine has become a private military company at the service of NATO. During a session of the Security Council, Nebensia remarked that Kiev, contrary to the facts and common sense, has the illusion that thanks to NATO's military assistance it will succeed in defeating Russia in the battlefield, and continued stating that as a result, Ukraine has essentially become a private military enterprise of NATO, being paid money, being provided with weapons and information, and being told where to shoot and where to attack. So far, the military assistance provided to Ukraine has already reached over $40 billion and nearly half of it comes from the United States, according to the German Institute for World Economy in Kiev. New York City residents in the United States marched Saturday to call for peace between Russia and Ukraine. Protesters were scheduled to gather at Times Square to march in honor of human rights activist Martin Luther King's anti-war legacy. Demonstrators walked through downtown Manhattan, demanding an end to the U.S. involvement in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. The director of the Answer Coalition, Brian Becker, said that decades of government policy in Washington have pushed the parties into disagreement, and that the expansion of NATO and the prospect of Ukraine as a base of operation has set the stage for the current crisis. And we have more news coming up after a short break, so don't go away. From the south, Kazakhstan is holding elections on Saturday to elect 20 new senators from among 55 candidates in what the President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev calls a political renewal after his re-election. President Tokayev assured that they will continue with a systematic process of political modernization where the practice of institutional reform carried out in June 2022 will be implemented. The majority of senators are being chosen by direct vote, mostly members of the Amanat Party. At least 10 of them will be appointed by the President and 5 by the People's Assembly. According to preliminary data provided by the Central Election Commission, only 3 women out of 18 have so far managed to secure a seat in the Senate, compared to 17 men. The governments of Syria and Russia evaluate mechanisms for deepening cooperation in the energy sector. The Syrian ambassador to the Russian Federation, Bashar al-Jafari, reviewed with a delegation of the government of the Eurasian country the ways to develop bilateral cooperation between the two countries in the energy and electricity sector. The official stressed the need for this cooperation, recalling the difficult circumstances that Syria is currently facing as a result of the policies of the US and Turkish occupiers and their sagging of the resources and wealth of the Syrian people. Local activists in Syria confirmed that US illegal troops in the country continue plundering the Arab nation's oil resources. According to local media, a caravan of 53 tanker trucks loaded with Syrian crude oil left the oil fields in the northeast of the province of Hasakeh and entered Iraq through the illegal crossing of Mahmoudia. This plundering of Syrian assets is added to the many others carried out by US troops, together with the so-called Democratic Forces of Syria, and takes place in the middle of the energy crisis that the country is experiencing due to Washington's illegal occupation. The Syrian Foreign Ministry has repeatedly denounced that the losses in the sector exceed $105 billion. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian visited Syria this Saturday and was received by President Bashar al-Assad. The visit seeks not only to strengthen ties but also to address and resume the historic and close relations and bilateral cooperation between both countries. Minister Abdollahian stressed that Syria is a very influential nation, so its strength and development is undoubtedly important for the region as a whole, and therefore they should keep their close relationships and joint ties to support each other in regional and international matters. Palestinian prisoners in Israel announced new protests in rejection of punitive measures applied by Tel Aviv authorities against them. In a press release, prisoners of the governmental Fatah movement called on the inhabitants of occupied territories to support the struggle in Israeli prisons. Prisoners also denounced that they are facing difficult living conditions due to the cold, since they lack heating and coats to cope with the winter. They say that although their families try to bring them clothes, prison service officials in that country do not allow them to receive any. This new wave of demonstrations add to the systematic protests by Palestinian prisoners, including hunger strikes to reject punitive measures taken against them or to denounce Israeli crimes in the West Bank. The Polisario Front demands respect for its self-determination and independence during the 16th Congress of the Arab Organization, which is taking place in Sahrawi refugee camps in the Algerian territory. The Secretary General of the Polisario Front and President of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, Brahim Ghali, declared that his state will not get involved in any peace process which deviates from the initial plan of the United Nations Organization and the African Union. Ghali made it clear that the relations of the Polisario with Madrid will remain frozen, while reiterating that the Sahrawi people will continue its just struggle for its independence and sovereignty. He also thanked the Latin American solidarity present at the Congress, especially that from Cuba, Venezuela, Panama, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Puerto Rico, Nicaragua, and Argentina.
The Congress will be a success and will take place thanks to the struggle of the Sahrawi people and their struggle against colonization.
Our presence at the 16th Congress shows the unity of the Sahara. It shows that we defy the Moroccan presence. We embrace the prisoners. We embrace the martyrs. All this is the price to pay. We can only drive Morocco out of our land throughout unity.
We have come to the end of this news brief, where you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For teleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.